Okay, so good evening and welcome everyone, and thanks Deepal for pointing that out. My name is Maulik Shah, co-founder and CEO of Almus Risk Consulting, and thank you very much for attending the Almus monthly webisode series, which is the 12th in the series. We started last April every month, and this is the last webisode of the current financial year. Uh, as Almus, we are into the risk consulting business. We manage currency, commodity, and interest rate risk for the clients across industries, across geographies. And this monthly webisode series is our endeavor, our passion to offer what we have. And what we have is the information, the knowledge, the research, and an amazing network of extraordinary people who are kind enough to come and speak at the platform. Like we have the two experts today on the webinar. And I think the most important thing is what is really bringing us back every month with the webisode on a different topic is your interest, your enthusiasm. So really, thank you all very much for joining in, taking your time out of your schedule and being part of this session. Let me now welcome the two experts on the subject. Uh, Both are the authorities when it comes to the topic on the supply chain. We have Deepal Shah, the Group Chief Financial Officer, All Cargo Logistics Limited, which is one of the leading logistics solution provider across the globe with a network across, I guess, more than 150 countries. Welcome, Deepal, to the Almas monthly webisode series.
Thank you, Maulik, for having me.
And Rahul Kapoor, S&P Global Head, Shipping Analytics and Research, Commodity Insights. Rahul is an authority on the subject. He has been the voice to hear when it comes to a view, opinions on the topic of supply chain, the commodity. He's been interviewed by the TVs, the presses. Recently, he also appeared in a Bloomberg for an interview on the recent development that happened at the Baltimore Bridge. And it's really indeed a pleasure to have you, Rahul. Thank you very much for joining in.
Pleasure to be here.
And coming to the today's topic, the trade transit on the sea is definitely one of the most important means of trade. And I think that has really come under pressure of late. I mean, all of us over last, I would say 2 to 3 years, have been really used to, I would say, a word called change in the world order. But I think the last 4 5 months, what we are really experiencing is the change in the supply chain, change in the order of the supply chain, wherein 15% of the global shipping traffic, when it transits through a Red Sea, and that's really under attack. Now, it is not just the geopolitics. We have also gone through a major disruption due to climate. So all in all, the supply chain is definitely under challenge. And there is a significant development. It's very important for most of the players who are involved in an international trade, or even if they are local players, there's a direct and an indirect impact. And what we are going to hear from both of them is really how it is going to impact. One, whether whatever we are experiencing today is a transitory or there's a permanent shift in the way we do a trade. That's one. And what's really the impact long term on the inflation, on many other economic parameters. So that's really the flow of the session. I mean, as far as the conversations are concerned, I'll first invite Rahul, who will share a presentation, and then I will invite Deepal for an opening remark. Post which it will be a free flow conversation. I have my own set of questions which I'll place to them, and I'm inviting all of you. Any questions, any clarification you may have, put it up in the chat box. I'll pick it up and place it to the speakers. So that's how we plan to conduct the session. It's from 1 hour till 6, and feel free to participate through chat, and anytime any questions you may have, feel free to raise your hands as well. We'll see if we can pull you into the room. Not sure, but there we are about the today's session. Let me first invite Rahul. Rahul, over to you for your initial talk and the presentation, and let me open up the presentation that you shared. Yeah, here we go. Is it audible? I mean, is it visible?
Yes, perfect. So I think if you can go to the full screen.
Yes. Just 1 second.
Sure. Right. If you can go back to slide 1. Perfect. So I think Thank you again for having me. I think if you look at, I'm highlighting three key incidents here, right? So the next slide, please. Yeah. So it started on November 19th, right? As you said, Suez Canal, Red Sea is one of the key, what we call super maritime highway. It's a global shipping choke point. November 19th, when we had the Houthis board what we call a car carrier Galaxy Leader, it was captured and taken away, right? So it started essentially the whole crisis, which you're talking about today, the Red Sea crisis back in November 19th. And then we had series of incidents. This particular one changed something because this vessel, which was struck by anti-ship missile, sank on the 2nd of March. And one of the recent one, which is the last one, where we had unfortunate loss of lives. That's the next slide, please. So this was true confidence. This actually, the ship was struck by a missile and we had 3 crew killed, right? So just putting in perspective, what we are talking about here is we have to understand that there's a freedom of navigation principle in the commercial shipping, right? That is being targeted. Normally in the world trade over the last so many decades, and we have to go back to tanker wars in 1980s when we saw something like this. So essentially, in our view, this is what we call weaponization of a global shipping choke point, right? This has certainly shaken up the global trade. You're talking about container ships which have rerouted, the energy shipments, LPG and LNG, which have almost disappeared, right? So the epicenter for the audience lies at what we call Bab el-Mandeb choke point, right? This is a vital strait through the southern entrance of the Red Sea. We have encountered close to 40 plus confirmed cases, and they continue to increase on a daily basis, right? The key challenge here is it remains unclear what exact measures Houthis are targeting, right? In terms of how to determine these commercial shipping targets. They've earlier said that they're targeting a particular country's vessels, and then we've seen many other shipping companies as well as many vessels with different flags, different classification societies and all come under attack, right? So this increases a risk that it's not only these specific country-owned vessels or country flag vessels which they're targeting, many more shipping companies as well as the ships which have come under target as well. Our view is, and this is the concerning part is with the geopolitics, is this could become a template for the future conflicts. When we say that is, now that successfully what they aim to do when they started this, they've successfully managed to divert 50% of the trade through Suez Canal. That's almost down by 50%, right? And this could be a template for the future conflict. It could happen at the Strait of Hormuz. It could be done at the South China Sea and so on, right? So you've basically targeted commercial shipping. You've raised your voice on the world order, and that's what they've achieved. These attacks continue to persist despite the US and UK strikes in that region. And in our view, the likelihood of a return to normal trade where it was before this crisis began is very much unlikely in 2024, right? As you see on the left-hand side, these two particular graphs, right? Cape of Good Hope, where the rerouting has happened, you're avoiding the Suez Canal and Red Sea, that has gone up exponentially. And what we saw a bit of uptick, which was primarily driven by divergence on the Panama Canal, the yellow line on the left-hand side, that has started to come down, right? So it's bifurcated in that sense. The number of ships which are passing through the Cape of Good Hope continues to increase on a daily basis. So we will see more and more shipping companies rerouting more and more ships across the segments, right? Whether it's a merchandise supply chains from the container side or the energy supply chains from crude oil, product tankers, and so on, continue to divert. Next slide, please. I think this is looking at what the mix of these vessels which go in, right? So all of this data comes from S&P Global Commodity Insights, and we continue to see across the segments, ships continue to divert, right? Close to around 20,000 plus vessels transit this particular lane every year. And we see almost all of that trade being disrupted. 50% is rerouted. A certain portion of vessels which are still using that is driven by what the charters are asking, right? But the fact is, after True Confidence, where we saw these, as well as Ruby Mar, when we saw this vessel sink and crew lives lost, we started seeing more of these divergence. Next slide, please. This shows you pictorially, right? So I think we have to understand what is happening here is, as you would see, a vessel which is coming in from Singapore, where I'm based, and going into Europe, earlier would take a route via the Suez Canal or the Red Sea. As you divert, and this is on the left-hand side, as you divert, you're talking about almost 2 to 3 weeks, which you're adding in, right? A one vessel or diversion is okay when you're doing it at a global scale. You're talking about much higher inventory costs. You're talking about much higher, what we call fuel consumption, bunker burn, right? Essentially, you're bringing those more inventory carrying costs into the supply chains, right? That's affecting the global trade, or for that matter, particularly the Asia-Europe trade, and same thing when you're coming back. And the second one is this is the Middle Eastern crude cargoes, which are again going into Europe, being diverted again. It would take you 7 days. Now you're adding it 21 days, right? So more cargo being spent at sea is a cost, right? It's essentially, and we'll talk about the inflationary aspect of it, but for the ship owners, for the cargo buyers and owners on the boat side, it is more of your goods spending time at sea, higher freight rates, as well as what we call inefficiencies in the supply chain. Next slide, please. I think I'm looking at the tankers here and talk about the containers as well. Again, if you look at the first left-hand slide, this was almost down from 300 odd vessels, and this is Feb numbers. If you look at March numbers, somewhere similar to the line, that's almost down 50%, right? So essentially, whether it's product tankers or your crude oil tankers, you're spending more time at sea. Your crude oil is more at sea, it builds into the inventories. It takes time to show up on shore, right? If you're looking at the product and the refined products as well, your jet oil, gasoline, fuel oil, which is going from, let's say, Asia to Europe, again, spending more time at sea, right? Europe has been relying a lot on East of Suez markets, and particularly India, since the Russia-Ukraine war, right? That trade has come under pressure as well. And what does this is the tanker markets are already tight. So we did see a surge in terms of rates, and these rates certainly hit a very strong 10-year highs kind of a thing early when the crisis happened. But as the capacity has been available, we've seen some of that rates come down, but the market still remains very tight. So any other disruptions or a bit of a cargo surge, the rates could again go up significantly. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? This is what I was talking earlier, right? So this chart again is early March, but as we see it, there's more oil which is building on the water, right? More oil building on the water essentially mean there's more what we call liquid pipeline, or the crude oil floating pipeline, which is there at sea, right? More oil in the sea again essentially means you're talking about higher inventory cost. Your onshore crude inventory is already low, right? So you've seen oil prices being significantly higher compared to pay over late last year, and there's a geopolitical risk premium plus what we call inventory storage at sea being built into the oil prices as well. Next slide. I think just closing this one here on the oil side, right? So the geopolitical risk has been a key driver on the oil prices, right? Understandably, we have to understand is why, and this we get asked a lot, is why are the oil prices not showing that much material surge, right? You're talking about key choke point which has been disrupted. Tankers, the ships have been attacked, but we haven't seen a major surge in oil prices. The only reason from our standpoint is what is happening in terms of non-OPEC plus oil production, right? US oil production has been surging. You have lots of oil which is coming out of non-OPEC, particularly United States, Brazil, Guyana, as well as we have OPEC, which is cutting down, right? So the non-OPEC as well as production which has been into the market essentially mean we are in a we're not in a supply deficit, but we have ample supply of oil available globally, right? So there's a bit of economic slowdown, enough oil available, and that's why we haven't seen a material surge in oil prices. And if it were not for a supply growth, which we've seen from non-OPEC suppliers, we could have seen oil prices materially higher. So for now, our view is there will be supply glut, which is essentially this year as well as next year, and the oil prices would be capped in that sense, right? So despite the supply glut, we're still at 85 Brent in terms of the pricing. Next slide, please. Lastly, in terms of, again, another aspect of this is the container crisis, right? So initially what happened, and this is the most affected market from this Suez or the Red Sea impact, right? As you would see, the first right-hand chart, the moment this happened, the rates, which were around $1,000 per TEU, went up to around 3,000, 4,000, and we started some of that correct, right? Essentially, the container market over the last 2-3 years has gone through COVID-19, again, Russia-Ukraine war, but there was a demand which has been weakening over the last 2 years. There has been ample supply. So the container shipping was effectively able to take that extra capacity, add more ships, reroute these vessels, and take in some of that slack in the system, right? So the market is balanced, the rates have corrected, and that's why we haven't seen a major disruption as such. We look at within the S&P Global PMIs, what we call the global supply delivery times, right? They've shortened slightly, and our view is looking at this, the worst of the Red Sea impact, particularly for the container supply chain, is already over, right? We saw that in US Eurozone, where actually the supply delivery time shortened as well. And overall, despite the huge rerouting of the global container supply chains, I think it has been coming back into the sync with taking the extra sailing times just because the demand has been weaker and we've had enough capacity available to take care of what has happened here. There hasn't been much of a restocking over the last 2 years. We've been in an inventory destocking cycle. We've seen certain recent data points where the US European growth is slightly getting better. We are starting to destock again, growing again, but it still remains very low, right? So you can blame it, or I would say not a strong demand scenario globally in terms of the container demand, as well as ample capacity which has been available. And that's why we didn't see the rates go back to where we were back in COVID-19 times, right? Pretty significant number, that one. So overall, the impact for that has been muted. Like I said, the markets are still very inefficient in terms of all these disruptions happening, capacity being very, very tight, right? And we could see a sudden surge as well as the impact if this were to worsen. But for now, I think we've taken into that, the markets have taken that into the stride, have balance for now, and we expect this to continue for the rest of 2024. I think that was my last slide. With that, I'll give it back to you, Maulik.
Great, thank you so much, Rahul. So a couple of points I think very relevant. One is weaponization of the shipping choke points. Definitely we have been used to a word called weaponization of the financial weapon, but this is a new terms, very interesting. Another thing that you said, and very interestingly, in spite of all of this, what has happened in the last 3-4 months, we haven't really seen the impact on the oil price. And I think largely maybe getting offset by a slow demand, maybe a additional supply, and that's really kind of a rebalance. One would expect definitely an impact on the commodity, which is not what has been there. And I think the slowdown in the overall sentiments has really had a offsetting effect with the supply chain disruption. So
Indeed.
some key points. Let me bring in Deepal. Deepal, with your experience and across the globe, what are you seeing? How are things really getting impacted? What's your view on the current conditions that you see?
I think thanks, Rahul. I think Rahul said everything, so not much for me to add anymore, but it's covered very well actually. But I'll just go back to a little bit of overall view. So, I think we have to look at markets and typically shipping in a pre 2019 scenario and a post 2019 scenario. I think there has been significant change. In the past, I think so. Post 2019, I think the normalization of the world trade, is becoming a challenge. So up to 2019, we had this normalization. So if you go back 2008, the financial crisis was there. It impacted the global trade, and then things normalized as we went along after a couple of years, and then there was a normal chart leading to higher volumes. A fair average, I think, global world trade grew at in the range of 1.5 to 2% on an average, approximately, and that was a fair growth globally. Up to 2019, I think shipping lines were struggling, with very low freight rates. There's a lot of consolidation that happened in that industry. You see way back in 2019. Post 2019, I think normal, world trade scenarios haven't come. So we were inflicted with the COVID basically episode globally. Then we had the Suez Canal, and then we have the wars in Ukraine, now the Middle East war and the Red Sea crisis. So things have just kind of not been normal. So all of these things typically continue to impact in some form of global trade. But on the positive side, I think trade, though there could be in the short run, there could be a little bit of challenges, but we've seen globalization and trade to be resilient. I mean, they are finding alternative routes. So we are seeing a lot of so for example, cargo is moving, but if not through Red Sea, it takes a little longer, more expensive. But most important is that the world trade kind of continues to move in some direction. So I think we've in this whole disruptive zone, and nobody can tell how much it will last, or when it will normalize. But this is where we are. We continue to remain amidst this volatile freight rates also, because these whole abnormal scenarios that we are facing will also impact the freight rates. So somewhere in 2020 the freight rates, before 2019 the freight rates had bottomed out. 2020 2021 it peaked, then again it kind of bottomed out, then again now they're kind of inching up a little. So these are, I think, these are fluctuations which will lead to normalization in the long run, is what we strongly believe. That's how we see it, that it will eventually normalize, I mean, over a period of time. So we've had various, from global health issues to global geopolitical issues. But as a shipping industry, I think we've been very resilient. I think what we also need to learn is, I think, a lot of companies are also being very innovative in terms of how they're looking. That's what we are seeing, how they are meeting their requirements in terms of supply chains. So which were stated to be you know very non-disruptive supply chains. Now they are seeing disruptions. So we are seeing a lot of innovative solutions in terms of how supply chains, how they're looking at options, how they're looking at plan B, how they are ensuring that their supply chains they don't have dependency only on one particular route or a one particular supplier. So we are seeing a lot of manufacturers looking at diversification in their supply chains also. So that will probably in the long run help them to beat any of these odds that may come along their way. So these are some of the things that we are observing at the moment. But we are very hopeful that things will normalize, and we've seen in the past these episodes do keep coming, and things then eventually normalize, unless of course we are looking at a very different world order in the future. So I'll pause here for comments.
So just Deepak,
Enough Rahul has already said, I think, wonderfully. I think
I'll just add to Deepal's point, right? Very important points is the supply chains, as in the world, got used to what is called, okay, take your supply chains for granted, right? I think before 2019, everybody knew that a just-in-time system works, the supply chain works very well. But I think what COVID-19 showed the world is you have to be very focused on your supply chains, right? I think one of the most, and the funny point is, one of the most sought after job right after COVID-19 was the chief supply chain officer, right? Because companies were stocked out, you're not able to get your goods right on time, right? So stocked out goods or shells essentially means you lose revenue, right? Because it's such a low cost in terms of what it used to be, right? People ignored that. So that is coming to the fore now. Getting a supply chain's resilience is very, very critical for all the companies. And these disruptions are happening much faster than what we are used to, right? So I think that is a good point which people made. And second is, I think this supply chain diversification as well, we are very focused on that. We started seeing that because people also realize that you can't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So I think whether it's China plus one, whether it's sourcing from different countries, friendshoring, nearshoring, which has been talked about for decades, has started happening. So we're seeing that as well.
So I think, see, one of the points that both of you talked about, one is the world has adapted to the new ways of operating, which is great. I mean, as we say, no, trade is always like a water; it will find its own way. But the key here is you have seen now a permanent shift in the entire supply chain. Now that will definitely have an impact, whether it is a cost or whether it is rerouting of some of the supply chain, including the freight. And I think we have few participants talking about the similar things. Are we now seeing this as a permanent shift? which probably may not be efficient. I mean, we earlier were operating in a bipolar world, a manufacturer and a consumer, and accordingly the supply chain were in place, which was very efficient. Versus now, even that bipolar has become multipolar. Plus, you have all those stress. I mean, are we really talking about, though adapted, but an inefficient supply chain or a higher cost, whether it is a freight or a time? What's your view?
Sure. Yeah, if I
Yeah,
can.
Deepal, you can start and then
Yeah.
maybe Rahul can comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Deepak.
So you're right, I think, Maulik. It's moving from a bipolar to a multipolar world. So like Rahul spoke about China plus one. So we are already seeing global manufacturing shifting bases. I wouldn't like to comment on from which country to which country, but I think everybody knows that there has been a significant thought process globally. But it is also very important for one to understand that supply chains have it takes a very long time to set up your supply chain. So it's not a lift shift which you can do overnight, right? And supply chains tend to kind of depend on manufacturing units, and these are not some things which these are asset heavy things. You just can't flip your manufacturing base very easily. So I think it's a process, and I believe it will take a couple of years to move it into a completely multipolar kind of a situation where you can diversify and of course once you diversify to some extent your economies of scale and all take a minor hit in terms of manufacturing. But yes, we believe that it will be a multipolar world. One, two. I also believe that it's not so easy to do it immediately. Yeah. So till such time that happens, it will be more innovation around how to navigate in terms of dynamic route optimization and around how to get your cargo from point A to point B. I think that's where the innovation will happen. Till such time the base shift happens. So that's how we believe it will turn out to be. I'll pause you for Rahul. Rahul, over to you.
Yeah, no, totally agree, right? I think I said China plus one, but we also understand that China will remain the factory of the world for decades to come, right? And I'm sitting in Singapore, so the #2 port in the world, right? And just a caveat, because this does get talked about a lot, but we don't have, and I'm talking particularly about India, the top 10 port, right? Many of the big container ships do not visit. So it's a decadal shift which you're talking about. Many countries in ASEAN, not just one, right? So we're talking about multipolar in that sense, right? But the world trade still today remains, and when we talk about merchandise supply chains, is essentially north-south, right? So going from Asia to the Western economies of Europe and the US. So it will continue to shift. And the second point I think which people made is the supply chains are agile, right? So the players in the market which innovate, there is agility which costs now. I think people were used to paying a lot more the supply education. You're looking at higher cost as well, right? So that's also needs to be built into the system.
And on the cost, people, how do you see that trend emerging? The ability to pass on or ability to afford the higher cost?
No, I think so. It's very complex and it's not so simple. So it will depend industry to industry, and I think passing on cost is also a function of demand. I think that's how we always see it. With global demand, as we see, except for a few pockets, tapering. We believe the capability to pass on cost would be limited in most of the industries. That's where we are. And a classic example through COVID and through 2021, 2022, because of the pent-up demand, there was a high demand. There was a fair bit of ease of passing on the costs, and we saw inflation come in, right? So, but what we are seeing here is that demand currently, is stagnating globally to some extent, and to pass on these costs, some of these increase would be very difficult for most of the industries. That's how we at the moment.
Yeah, Rahul, your take on the inflationary impact.
No, definitely, right? If it wasn't, we are in a normalization phase of inflation, right? If you look at Fed also puts out that how much of this inflation was caused by supply chain. It's a very very correlated in that sense. You can't put it all in supply chains, but just going back to 2021, I think people mentioned about COVID was essentially there wasn't much sorry, equipment available, right? So that was also not only the supply chain from the container side of things, it was also a port issue, right? The drivers, chases, all of that availability across the globe was impacted heavily, right? So then it was broken landside system. You had ships which are not available. So you could actually charge, or the freight carriers could actually ask for $10,000, $15,000 per TEU going in from Asia to Europe or US, right? I think we actually lost almost 80-90% of that rate when we went into 2022-23 as the demand normalized. But the key here is any disruptions like we saw with the Red Sea, the rates quickly went up from $1,000 to $5,000, right? We started correcting, but they're still almost 2 or 3 times higher than where we were at the end of November, effectively October end last year. So it's the small surges is essentially happening because the capacity has been tighter, right? Again, the thing is, if it wasn't that the container shipping was over capacity this year, and again, there are lots of new ships coming in next year, we're not seeing a major upsurge in rates, right? There's a cap and then continue to come down. When I said is you have to build in higher costs, it's certainly a function of demand. But as the demand turns, your floor is much higher or rather, I would say the bottom is much higher in terms of rates, right? And then the upside with when people are happy to pay $20,000, I think the companies also realize that if there's a demand, you can certainly ask for a lot more. Because if you go back 2008 till 2019, the rates were pretty much very, very weak right after the global financial crisis. Yeah.
Deepali, you mentioned about it takes time to build the supply chain, the new supply chain. But I think, and you also talked about the innovations. The necessity is the mother of all invention. In the last couple of months, have you really seen, and maybe Rahul, I'll come to you as well, a new sea routes, a supply of the sea routes, on the horizon, or emerging trend? Are you seeing that? Maybe we already have seen the diversion of some traffic, but are you really seeing some of the ports being active? That probably will add to the supply side of the sea routes.
So, Maulik, I think first I just want to just add to the previous point, to what Rahul said is that, yeah, I think few years back we had demand-driven inflation. Now you'll have supply-driven marginal inflation, not that much high. So I think that's to understand inflation comes from two sides, right? It doesn't come only from one side. So that is, I think, what we need to. I thought I'll just bring that point out for people to understand how inflation will be impacted and how it won't be as much. Second, coming back to the current point, I think Red Sea crisis was a sudden crisis. There is a good amount of so what happens, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is to reroute your shipment, which is through the Cape of Good Hope, which most of the shipments are doing, right? As of now, I think people are watching. Now things will, because we had the crisis typically in the Suez Canal, right? So it was blocked for some time, and immediately people start thinking about rerouting everything or being completely innovative on supply chains, right? So I think people will wait and watch, and if things don't kind of move in a particular direction as they expect, obviously they'll get very innovative. What we are seeing currently is that yes, Meanwhile, the shift could, wherever possible, where there is urgency, the shift could happen to air freight, from ocean, basically, for urgent shipments. And yes, people do reroute shipments, so people do kind of find alternative ways of rerouting, but for trade lanes, for shipping lanes to change, I think we need to give it some more time from that perspective. They'll be rethinking about. I think we're pausing for a while to understand how this is going to shape up before
Sure.
because it's completely a new change in your scheduled sailings. To set up a scheduled sailing, it's quite a bit of time and effort, and you have to understand the whole dynamics. The port of calling and the whole. So it takes time. So in my view, it will take time, but yes, there will be innovation. There'll always be innovation. Yeah,
You're
we've
already seeing a
survived
shift.
everything. We've known to survive everything. So
Yeah,
there will definitely be
You,
innovation.
you survived COVID, I think you survived.
yeah.
So there will
So
be
one other thing you're saying that there's already a shift to the sea, from a sea to the air route. I mean that
very marginally
marginally.
because see, commodities and all cannot go because it's very expensive.
Yeah,
But high value shipments and some urgent shipments, part parcels can shift. We did see currently 97% cargo moves, actually global cargo 97% moves through the sea route. So it's only 3%. So very little can actually inch up to and be taken over by air freight.
yeah.
And it's far more expensive as well. Yeah, so we'll have to be cognizant of that as well.
Sure. Yeah, Rahul, I mean, data points on the new routes.
Yeah,
Supply.
exactly. I think that's one very valid point. But I think the new routes established, as we've certainly seen on the container ones, right? We're talking about almost 80% of the capacity which is rerouted, right? There's still some shipping companies which are using that, including container shipping and that's it. But there's also a component of which I would say is energy supply chains, right? The new trade routes emerged is essentially after the Russia-Ukraine war, you have the Russian crude oil which is coming into India. That is a new trade route. It never used to come this way, right? From North Sea as well as others as well, coming into the Far East, so India, China, and so on. But that has been disrupted as well. And there's a component is as that oil or crude oil spends more time at sea, it becomes uncompetitive for India as well. So India will have to start looking at other places for sourcing crude oil, right?
Yes.
We're hearing about India and Russia talking about establishing a working group to get this via North Sea, right? Very, I would say, not a year-round kind of passage, right? You're talking about North Sea route, which is essentially frozen for the 6 months. So these are being talked about. Then there was Indian products, essentially refined products, which are going into from what we call East of Suez, Russia to Europe, right? Particularly crude oil, particularly kerosene, jet fuel, gas oil, right? So I think that has been disrupted because that has to reroute, right? The arbitrages which are open goes away, right? So these all changes and that has an impact on the pricing of these goods as well. One thing which we've seen, and this is very important, is and India gets a lot of US LPG, right? So again, that was if it's coming via and Far East as well, coming via Panama Canal, we've seen a problem with Panama Canal with the drought there as well, which was already happening with rerouting. And the LNG shipments, and it was very surprising for us to see there is no LNG shipments which are going through Suez Canal, right? It comes down to we have a supply glut in the market. So the LNG is staying in Asia, Europe is staying in Europe, Atlantic. So there's swaps happening there. So again, the supply chain, whether it's containers, merchandise, or energy supply chains, they do adapt. You have to pay a price for it, essentially, right?
Yeah. I want to switch to geopolitics and take your comments. But before that, I just want to scroll through some of the questions which maybe I think you already have answered. But if you still have additional point, do respond. Praveen from S&P Global, you mentioned that it's an additional 2 weeks by passing through Cape of Good Hope. What's the impact on freight rates? We talked about it. The freight rate should increase, but I'm not seeing much increase in freight rates. I think you already commented. Anything else, additional points you have? Deepal or
Exactly right. I think we did see freight rates for the container market are higher than where they were back in November, right? So we're still significantly higher. They've started correcting as the supply chain, maybe like I said, comes in sync, and there is not a surge in demand, right? Demand has been weak. As we go into the peak season, we'll see how it evolves, right? But
Yeah.
for now, we're
Yeah,
okay.
and Mudit commented, more than this disruption, the problem is very high road freight rates in India due to 100% taxation on petrol and diesel. Got it, Mudit. And if there is international freight rate disruption, the government should reduce its taxes. The economy should not be affected, but in reality, the government is never affected at the cost of its citizens. So, got your comments, Mudit.
Now we cannot comment on.
Yeah, we got Mudit's comment for sure and the suggestions. Then Mr. Lakdawala, will geopolitics move to hydropolitics, increase events and high risk for supply chain? Any one of you want to comment on this?
Yeah, it's hydropolitics essentially is availability of water and resources, right? So we can mix it. It's all part of the geopolitics, right? So if the next war is going to be fought over water, it certainly will have an impact. Yeah.
Mr. Yashwant Rao says, if Trump wins, he's certainly going to make it difficult for Iran. This might escalate the situation further and prolong the deadlock. Can't say whether Iran may block Hormuz Straits. Also, besides the current Bab el Mandeb through their proxy, the Houthis, this may see the brand crossing 100 barrel. What's your opinion on this? So, view on oil as well.
Opinion on the election, I think, but the key is the Strait of Hormuz is a very important point. We have to understand that 30% of the oil flows through that, right? It's not the same as Red Sea, so that will certainly have an impact because, like I said, it's more important for the oil trade than the Suez Canal or the Red Sea.
Deepal, maybe you can take up this one. What percentage additional costs on account of Red Sea issues are absorbed by shipping companies, and what percentage is passed on to industry's customers by shipping companies?
No, I don't think so. We have the exact numbers. Nobody would have. But yeah, it entails a much higher cost in terms of rerouting. And rerouting, it's a much longer route. It takes much longer time. So it impacts fuel cost. It impacts crew operating cost, basically. And it impacts your number of voyages. Now let's understand the shipping industry itself is it's a very tough industry to be in. If your number of voyages go down, it's about how good you sweat your ship, right? And if your number of voyages go down, it's going to hurt you. So there are real costs for the shipping industry, no doubt about that. But to ascertain how much exact percentage that would be, it's very difficult for us to say now.
Got it. So this was from Venkatesh, and he has one follow-up question as well. Due to Red Sea and any other further sea route challenges, what percentage of business do sea freight companies are losing to air freight on a permanent basis? While you already mentioned, Deepal, that there are a marginal shift which is happening, whether it is a permanent or not, anything else you want to comment, Deepal, on this?
It was about the freight rates, is it?
Yeah, so no, shift to the air freight on a permanent basis.
No. I don't. So air freight is always more expensive than the sea route. So it can't be a permanent shift. See, it's the rerouting of both. Please understand the Red Sea crisis, is temporary, is how we see it at the moment. So the rerouting cannot be permanent, right? So that the route which gets to Europe through the Red Sea is the most optimal route, right? And no other route can geography is not going to change overnight, right? Geography is what geography is, right? That's how the land and the land mass and the sea masses on the planet, right? So that's not going to change. So this even shift to air freight is temporary. Commodities, the very fact that 97% of cargo moves by sea freight itself says that air is a much more expensive thing to move, and it's only for essentials or for urgent or very specific cargos. It cannot be for all types of cargo on a permanent basis. So we do not believe that a shift to air freight will be permanent.
Got it.
Unless the cost at the air freight as an industry significantly change, which we also don't see coming anytime soon.
Got it. Pratik has a question, will Red Sea have an impact on the inventories, be it commodities or any other service?
Yeah, I think definitely, right? So like I said, if you're adding 2 weeks to the voyage, you are talking about higher inventory at sea, right? I think initial part, we did hear some of the automotive OEMs in Europe talking about stock out for that particular few weeks. But as the inventory comes in, right, because it works on the just-in-time system. Globally, we're still in that just-in-time. You want to minimize your inventory carrying cost to optimize your operational profitability, right? But this does have an impact. The second impact is spending more time at sea in terms of the exporters. Margin is also a problem, right? Some of the margin exporters do work on very thin margins, and again, more time at sea certainly has an impact there as well. Maybe people can add.
No, I think just in time, so we are seeing a lot of disruption in that thought process itself,
Yes. Agree.
That's a
Uh,
good question, actually.
yeah, in fact, I must mention to you that pre 2019, I know industries and companies who are extremely efficient have had extremely efficient supply chains and absolute just-in-time services. And you will not believe, they hardly used to carry any inventory.
Mm.
I have seen very large factories with almost zero storage, very, very little, storage, it's the supply chain was so well, efficiently managed. So it was brilliant, in that sense. Um, and yeah, everybody will be scratching their head with this, and we saw that, right? I mean, we saw automobile getting disrupted. We saw through COVID, the chip manufacturing went down. Many vehicles couldn't come out because chips were not available. Now everything depends on chip, right? So there was so much of dependency on the chips being available, and that led to some of the industries not actually getting to produce things, right?
Yeah.
So I think just in time as a concept, brilliant. People have been extremely efficient, and I was surprised for some of the industries how efficient they were. They have to remodel some of their just in time plans, right?
Yeah.
That's how I think.
Yeah, that brought about what we been debating since, that is efficiency versus resilience, right? You have to
Absolutely.
balance the two. It's not just efficient, supply chains has to be resilient as well.
You have
Yeah.
to do the balancing act. Yeah.
And there is a cost of resilience.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to do a balancing act now. So earlier it was completely leaning towards efficiency. Now you have to start balancing that
Yeah.
with
Slightly
resilience.
here to the geopolitics. Is China the clear winner in whatever is happening? And I'm just putting a reference here. There's a lot of Chinese ships to pass. I don't know practically how it is possible through a classification of the ships and all that. In reality, actually, even that also has dropped. But whatever is happening, any comments, any views there?
Yeah, I can. We've commented on this earlier as well, because this does play into the global power balance, right? With free passage of what we call Chinese and Russian ships, which has been talked about as reported, right? So with these ships can safely transit a key shipping passage, and what happens that when the US and EU ships cannot, right? So it is playing out right now. We'll have to see more to it, but we also have to understand that the ships which have been targeted, the recent ones, was actually a Chinese-owned ship. In that sense, it was a Chinese flagship as well, right? So
Maybe it was not identified properly.
exactly right. So there is struggles with identifying, because you have to understand shipping in that sense is a opaque ownership structure, right? So in terms of the ship manager is different, the classification society is different, and the who actually owns the ship, right? So there is a structure. It's an international business, it's an international market as well, so difficult to identify. But I think, like I said, is these things have never happened. When I say that, apart from a war, the tanker wars which were fought between, I think, Kuwait and Iraq back in 1980s, we haven't seen merchant ships being targeted, right? So you have to understand that there is a principle of freedom of navigation. So you do not do this, and that is being severely challenged, right? So and effectively they've succeeded in what they wanted to achieve, right? You rerouted 50% of the trade to Red Sea. Yeah. The impact of that is, I think, is in terms of geopolitics, if you have to see, is what happened with the Egyptian pound and the devaluation there, right? So that was a straw in the nail in the coffin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Dipal, any comments on China?
So See, when we're talking about winners and losers, no, I think winners and losers change depending upon the time frame that we apply it to. So we have to look at winners in short run and winners in long run, right? So the very fact that the manufacturing base is in the making of shifting, you know, for any country, I mean, irrespective of China, if my manufacturing base of a particular country is going out from where it is, yeah, I'm not a long-term winner. Yeah, so I would see that way. So we can, so winning and losing, definitions change over time frames. Yeah, in the short run you could be a winner with some of these things, but in the long run I think we are seeing, the whole China plus one policy which is coming out. We are seeing how most of the global organizations are thinking,
Hmm.
and we are seeing significant shift, from China to many other countries in terms of manufacturing base.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, if I were China, I would think, whether I'm a long term. So, a country cannot live on domestic consumption story forever, right? And we are a global village now. Yeah, so we are all very well interconnected.
Hmm.
So I think these are some of the things I think would come into consideration when you're deciding. We cannot judge who's the winner or loser, but these are points to consider, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just I
I
want to
think
add
to add there, right? I think it's important caveat was just saying plus one. We're not ruling it out, right? So it's not either or. It will have to be a mix of including that as well.
It's many actually, Rahul. It's not even plus one. I think the plus one argument
Plus, yeah, plus many, you're
is
right.
plus many now actually.
Exactly.
So we are seeing manufacturing shift to many of the Southeast Asian countries. India is trying to do its own bit. So
Right.
each country is trying to take a bite out of the China manufacturing outsourcing piece. Each
Indeed.
country wants to grow, so each one is trying to bite. Each one country is trying to take a position there,
Hmm.
and so I mean, in the long run, how will that really kind of pan out
Hmm.
for China? We don't know, right?
Hmm.
So that is important for us too.
I think we have the labor costs rising as well, right? So it's all mix of that geopolitics, your labor cost advantage. But I still go back to we did a report on India Look Forward Journal recently for S&P Global, wrote about manufacturing shift and so on. One thing which you look at is if you look at these 25,000, 26,000 TEU container ships being built, the biggest berths, so I think it's still a very focused North Asia market, right? You need more of that as well. The intermodal connectivity in India is increasing, but the ports have to play a part as well. I think India is effectively building greenfield ports, so that's a good signal as well. Whereas you're not seeing many of them being built over the globe, right? We haven't seen many port projects in in the developed world, or for that matter, even the North Asia for years. I think India and other ASEAN countries are doing that. That's a good.
Yeah. I'll pick up a few questions from the chat box. Mudit Jain, will another route be developed by Israel to offset the Suez Canal route? And I believe Israel threatened Egypt in 1960 war that if they attack Israel again, then Israel would an alternate route. But it has not happened in the last 50 years. So are you seeing an offset? I mean, the alternate route being developed by Israel?
I will not comment on this. Yeah.
Dipal, any
Yeah.
comment? Okay. Next question is from Pankaj Rathi. My question is about merchant transaction. These days, we are getting inquiry about the trade from China to Russia through India and payment through INR and CNH USD. Maybe people can answer. So, are you seeing a kind of a
No,
deglobalization?
this is a new one for me. And I mean, why would that happen? Because China and Russia have neither of them have. So one, they are at much more closer proximity, both politically also and demographically. I mean, geographically also. So
Hmm.
why would somebody route that for INR? I really don't know, and I'm not very sure about this. I haven't seen that happen. At least I haven't heard of that. Maybe it's happening, and I don't know about it. To be very honest
Sure.
with
Sure. Rahul, anything you are aware of
Can't
for
see experts to be speculating to say if it's happening. Yeah, I'm not
got
aware.
it. Got it. Yeah, I think, but one reference is yes, because of the lot of Russian import oil that we have done. I mean, Russia is definitely left with INR, and they don't know where to deploy. And there was a number which is close to about 30,000-40,000 CR, and they are looking out for a goods through which they can actually, give back INR to India. Possibly, if that is what the reference, I'm not sure. But I think this is definitely one issue for Russia. They're definitely not interested in an Indian asset. So the best way to offset is could be a buying in INR. And I think there are many European and USA corporates are trying for it. So maybe, yeah, that's well noted, Pankaj. I have one question. I think before we have only 4 minutes, but definitely want to pick your thoughts.
Like I see a good one. I think we probably end with that one, but I think whether are we seeing deglobalization, right? So I think this has been
Yeah.
what we've been talking about this since 2016, rather, when President Trump came about and the Trump tariffs on the world, right? And maybe I'll let Deepal take the first one on this, because this is something which we continue to hear from a lot of our clients as well.
Yeah.
In the midst
Yeah,
of-
go on, Rahul. Yeah, I think we can.
You want me to comment first, Rahul?
Yeah.
So, like I said earlier, and I'll take it from there. So, one, it's very difficult to switch supply chains over a shorter period of time. But there could be a fair bit of possibility of diversification of supply chains. Okay, see, globalization stems from uh, economies of scale. When you diversify, your economies of scale goes down, and people basically look at pockets where cost of production is lower. Okay, so the moment you diversify, your economies of scale go down, and then your cost of production goes down in some sense, right? But there will be a bit of diversification, and which we say we China plus multiple, China plus one or China plus many will happen to some extent. But yes, the diversification will happen in two parts. One, I think a lot of countries who have stopped manufacturing may want to kind of bring a little bit of manufacturing back for their own consumption, right? And to build more resilience for their economy. So you will see a little bit of, if not deglobalization, a little bit of globalization together with a color of regionalization. So you will see a little bit more of, in Asia, and in Europe, in the Americas, you will see a bit of pockets around that, rather than completely cross global scenario. That could be a possibility that we may look at, but it will be extremely. I don't see a scenario where the rate at which we are globally well connected. I don't see a situation where any country can survive without having trade or commerce with other countries. So that doesn't seem to be a possible situation.
No, indeed. I think just to add there, right? So as in we've heard, and one of the terms which I heard was globalization, right? So slow globalization is still continuing that part. But if you look at since China joined WTO back in early 2000, we've been in a massive globalization spree, right? Every country's benefited out of it. The world economy's benefited. Now what we are in a world of globalization, right? That's certainly been a term used, and we are in alignment with that. And just to last add there, right? I think the last year, the biggest supplier to US was Mexico, right? After almost decades, it replaced China, right? So again, being near, and that regionalization as people talked about certainly happening.
Just to that, Rahul, what also we need to see the consumption trends,
Exactly.
and so we are more focused on supply chain and manufacturing, but finally it's driven by the demand, right? What we are seeing is global consumers. Today we see people ordering from anywhere in the world, and with e-commerce becoming so so much in use, um, uh, I don't think so it's going to be that easy to kind of de-globalize that easily, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
so I think there is another trend which is emerging, which is the global consumer. The consumer, end consumer wants to buy anything from anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a classic case of
Globalization.
globalization continuing to be important for everyone.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that global consumer is another word that I would pick up after the weaponization of the supply choking points that you talked about, Rahul. I actually have one more question. I rather a topic, but I'm not sure how much we have time. Any quick comments? See, there's a whole lot of undersea infrastructure which is really impacting the internet and traffic. While we are seeing a disruption through an attack, are you really seeing a disruption in that area as well?
I think it's been brought about, but difficult to comment, Arvind. Yeah.
I think everything is going to move to satellites, and I mean, if you even look at today, you know, Mr. Musk has said that even your Wi-Fi can your basic which you use 4G 5G can come out of the satellite directly. You don't need to have towers. So I think that's not a threat. The sea cables and all aren't a threat because technology in terms of satellites and all can definitely surpass uh, the requirements and can meet those requirements. I personally do not believe that will become a big challenge.
Excellent. I'll just have a quick sum up, and I would really want you to add it to this quick sum up. One, we talked about the weaponization of the supply choke points, impact on the price not being so significant, maybe partly offsetting by the lower demand for now, but we are here for a higher cost moving forward because of the inefficiency, the additional supply chain or the rerouting of the supply chain will definitely take time. But in the meantime, you will have an innovations, quick, solutions to the existing problem through an innovative solutions. Possibly that could be one trend. The inflationary impact is here to stay. Maybe after globalization, again another new word that I picked up, gets balanced. We are talking about a global consumer, and I think that probably is resetting the whole thing. While on one hand we will continue to worry about bipolar, multipolar, China plus and all. But if end of the day, and Deepal rightly mentioned, it's a demand consumers who are going to drive the whole requirement. And I think that probably would be much more driving force than maybe the regional conflict. And that goes back to the earlier comment that I make. Trade is like a water, it will find its way. And we are trading on waters right now. So those are all the quick things. Anything else that I've missed out, Deepal, Rahul, you want to give your closing remarks?
No, very well covered, I would say.
Just I want to end on a positive note that weaponization of trade routes is not new. We've seen early days, centuries back, Silk Route being blocked, weaponized, Khyber Pass having so many wars. So I mean, this is the world we live in. So it will get back to normal. Yeah, I think.
Hope so.
Excellent. Thank you, really, both of you.
Thank you.
Indeed, it was sheer joy interacting with both of you. Indeed, thanks for your time, and thank you all very much for being here and participating in this conversation. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for having us.
Thanks.
Wonderful insights, Rahul. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, pleasure, people. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.